I think it's somewhat common knowledge that there was a Berserk game that was only released in Japan for the PS2. There's been an English translation patch created by someone who goes by Wesker90, so shout out to them. It's not perfect. There are a few sentences that don't make any grammatical sense, and the names are direct phonetic translations of the katakana, so you get Gatsu instead of Guts, and Shirka's name is spelled with an L instead of an R alongside some others, but those are minor complaints. Other than that, the translation's great. So let's figuratively pop it in and see what we missed over here in the West. Okay, video game, you have my attention. That is a godlike intro. That Hirasawa track is just stellar, and is the most fitting song for Berserk ever. I mean, that should have been the intro for the anime. Instead, we get "Put your glasses on, nothing will be wrong." I mean, I can appreciate the meme factor of that, but just as far as good factor, though, this is so much better. Alright, you nailed the fuck out of the intro, but this is a video game, so let's look at the actual game. This game follows the manga from the beginning of the Hawk of the Millennium arc and ends after Grunbell. Although it's mostly faithful to the manga, it actually adds one extra apostle for Guts to face who's exclusive to the game, but let's talk about that a little later. The game starts out with a little tutorial section where you fight big dumb snowmen for reasons, I guess. Once that's over though, the real beginning of the game is the battle between Guts and Zod on the snowy Hill of Swords. I don't really want to beat a dead rape horse or anything, but the cutscene of Guts, Griffith, and Zod on the Hill of Swords legitimately blows that same scene out of the water from the 2016 anime in terms of character models, sound design, animation, and cinematography. I get that that's a low bar to set, but this game's from 2004, so yeah, it's really not bad looking at all.
この場ならふさわしいだろう。俺たち鷹の団が再び集うには。その名を口にするんじゃねえ!
One word I would use to describe the feel of the gameplay would be weight. This is some pretty deep lore, so I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but the Dragon Slayer is really fucking heavy, and this game knows it. Swinging that sword is a commitment. I mean, you gotta put a ring on every single swing of that thing. Even your dodge has like 3 seconds of recovery just so Guts can reorient himself and the sword, honestly making the dodge kind of a shitty gameplay tool, but it is realistic. The sword may be cumbersome, but when it does connect with a normal enemy, it slices right through them in the exact same way as portrayed many times in the manga. The trademark spinning torsos after some poor zombie, bandit, or troll gets cut in half is on full display, and they really nailed it. This game really makes you feel like Batman. I mean, Spider-Man. Wait, a Jedi? No, Guts. Yeah, Guts. Okay, there's game review trope number 1 down. Now I just gotta remember to compare it to Dark Souls, then I can start working for the IGN. I mean, Dark Souls is just basically a Berserk fanfic game anyway, but now I'm getting off track. Guts is decked out with all the accessories that he has in the manga. He's got the arm cannon, Rickard's bombs, Judo's throwing knives, and the repeater crossbow. Their use is only limited with a cooldown timer, which I think is a great way to do it. If you had to start dealing with either buying or collecting consumable ammo for those things, I feel like I would almost never use them. But since they're on a timer, you can use them without having to worry about grinding or buying ammo. The one-on-one boss fights rely heavily on counters, reversals, and special cinematic attacks that are kinda reminiscent of the heat moves from the Yakuza series. When you land one of those on Zod, the sound of the Dragon Slayer smashing into Zod's sword as he tries to prevent himself from being cut in half is this deep, thunderous roar, and it's super satisfying. The only real downside to these types of attacks is that you only get one or two different types per enemy. So in these drawn out boss fights, the cool factor kind of goes down when you're doing the same cinematic attacks over and over again. Once you get out of the boss fight with Zod, the regular gameplay starts. And when I say regular gameplay, I mean this is literally all you're doing in the entire game, aside from bosses, cutscenes, and a short section in Enoch Village where you walk around and talk to people. Because of this, I decided to play the game on easy, and I am glad that I did. This is not the type of game that you want to delve into some deep combat systems and try to master. This is a game where you run around and kill shit. I feel like playing this on hard would just be no fun at all. So yeah, if you got a problem with repetitiveness in games, this is not for you. This is for Berserk fans who just kind of want to relive this chunk of the story and run around and rack up some kill combos with some shallow, yet deeply satisfying combat. Speaking of kill combos, the way you increase the amount of XP you get is to chain together kills for as long as possible. The higher the combo, the bigger the XP multiplier. After about 5 seconds of no kills, the counter resets. This is a neat way of naturally incentivizing a very Guts-like playstyle. The XP is spent on increasing health, attack speed, getting new attacks, and making the cooldown timer on your items faster. You know, your standard light RPG fare. The types of attacks you have in the game are right out of the manga. It even has a special follow-up option after you fire the cannon, where the recoil sends Guts sliding backwards, and if you do a slash while you're sliding backwards, Guts does the cannon recoil spinning attack that he does in the manga. There's also a feature where you can call upon your allies to perform special attacks as long as they're in the party at that part of the story. Serpico slows down time for a few seconds, allowing you to get in some extra hits on tough enemies. Shirka just gives you a flat defense boost for about 30 seconds. Isidro does an area of effect fireball, and Puck heals you. All these moves are on cooldown timers similar to the sub-weapons and can also be leveled up. This is where I get onto the only major problem with this game, and it's one I already touched on, the repetitiveness. It's actually really bad. There are 2 specific levels that are just so overly long for no reason other than to pad out the length of the game that if I was playing on a higher difficulty, I probably would have just given up. The first of these levels has you destroy bandit camps by running down long corridor paths for literally over an hour with enemies spawning around you endlessly. You run around to like 5 or 6 of these camps and then fight a bunch of normal enemies in those camps to destroy them. You could do it faster just by ignoring all the enemies along the way, which I would end up doing later in the game on the next bullshit level. But once you get to that point, you're just asking yourself why you're even playing the game anymore to begin with. Oh, there actually are some good reasons to play the game, but it'll absolutely drag you down at points. One thing that helps a little with the monotony is that the game does have quite a few different types of enemies that are pretty much all faithful to the manga. You get the normal undead who are always pursuing Guts, evil spirits, incubi, trolls, golem, those dumb snowmen, war demons, dogs with people faces, and that possessed tree that Guts saved Jill from. Okay, that's one thing I find kind of funny. Both this game and that Berserk Muso game that came out a few years ago have that tree as just an enemy type that just pops up all over the place. I mean, I get why they do that just to add variety and stuff in gameplay, but in the actual story, there's only one tree like that. The reason that tree's all possessed and evil like that is because it was used in some occult pagan ritual back in the day, where people would cut a woman's stomach open, pull out her intestines, nail them to the tree, and then force her to run around the tree, wrapping her intestines around it in the process. That's one specific tree. It's not like any tree can just turn into a monster if there's evil spirits around. But yeah, that's a pretty nitpicky complaint. Though there are quite a few different types of enemies, in terms of gameplay, there's only like 5 archetypes. Normal ones, fat ones that take more hits to kill, because corpulent enemies are tough and require combos. There's also floating enemies, quadrupeds, and ranged dudes. Each of these archetypes have different attacks and different animations when you kill them with your, for lack of a better term, heat moves. There's really not much to speak of when it comes to level design. Most of the levels are, like I said before, just a bunch of long corridor-like paths. The only sense of exploration this game has is deciding to go down a dead-end path in order to find these collectible gummy bear creatures that give you extra XP. The atmosphere, however, is quite fitting for Berserk. The snowy areas have this ever-present sound of wind with snow particles blowing through the air, limiting your vision as you tear your way through enemies. The music in these parts is somber, and it just really gives you a sense that Guts is just trying to make it through. The endless waves of enemies may be grating on a gameplay level, but that feeling is quite thematically appropriate with what Guts himself would be feeling. Other areas, like the forests around Flora's mansion and Enoch Village, have this dreary feeling of a world indifferent to the suffering of man. The Clifoth has all these surreal creatures running around, though the music in that zone kinda has the feel of the clowns farting in the basement song from Resident Evil Director's Cut. Also, Schnoz isn't there, so I should just give the game a 0 out of 10 for that. Long story short, though, the world of the game does feel like the world of Berserk. All this video game stuff is fine and all, but Berserk is nothing without its story and characters, so how does it handle that stuff?
セルピコ、ひざまずきなさい。
何の真似だ。
黒い剣士殿、どうか私どもを旅の一行にお加えください。私は知りたいのです。私の姿、秩序を超えた真実を。そして学びたいのです。秩序の巧妙なき闇の中でも生き抜く術を。どうかお導きください。
何言ってんかよくわかんねえ。ダメダメ、おかえり。
貴族ってのはどうしてこう仰々しいんだ。好きにしな。邪魔にならない限り俺は口出ししねえ。ただ明日にあんた後悔してるかもしれないぜ。俺たちと行くってことはもう眠れる夜は来ないってことだからな。
Very well, actually. All the major story beats are there, and the characters look, speak, and act just as they should. It's kinda hard to judge voice acting in foreign languages, but it sounds great to me, and all the emotions expressed are right on the money. All of the dark themes are present, and it only shies away from explicit depictions of sexual violence, which is understandable. It covers Guts struggling with the Beast of Darkness trying to tempt him into raping and murdering Casca, but doesn't show the extremely graphic parts.
この女が大切なの。グリフィスよりも。グリフィスの残した痛みを感じていたいから大切なんじゃないの。グリフィスへの憎しみを忘れないように。この女はグリフィスを焦がれ続けるための生贄さ。こうすればもっと深く深くグリフィスとつながる。やめろー！お前は望んでいる。
It also omits the part where the party saves those women who were kidnapped by the trolls, and we see the horrible way they reproduce, but that's about all that's quote-unquote censored. There are also some pretty important things in terms of character development missing, like Farnese struggling with her past by witnessing the dogmatic priest acting like she used to, and trying to help him out of that bigoted way of thinking, but again, Berserk has a lot of depth, and you can't realistically have everything in a game like this. Her character growth, aside from that, is present and accounted for alongside everyone else's. Shirka's standoffish and shy at first, but warms up to her friends as the story goes on. Isidro's his normal, irritating self. Serpico's cunning and cutthroat, yet has his go-with-the-flow attitude as long as Farnese is happy. Puck's Puck, Casca's Casca, and Guts is slowly allowing himself to rely on others and make friends again. The cutscenes are all well acted, paced, and directed. There's a lot of attention to detail when it comes to nailing important scenes from the manga. And when it comes to choosing which scenes and dialogue they needed to put into the game versus the ones they needed to leave out due to restrictions in budget, time, and pacing for a game like this, I'd say they did just about as good a job as you could hope for. I especially love the depiction of the scene where Shirka summons the spirits of the cardinal directions to wash away the trolls in Enoch Village. Like, it's just beautiful. With most of the canon story bits out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the stuff that's original to this game. Shortly after the Zod fight at the beginning of the game, Guts and Casca are out in a blizzard when they happen upon a mysterious mansion out in the middle of nowhere. A disembodied child's voice warns Guts to stay away, but of course he doesn't listen. Once inside the foyer, Guts sees a child on the second floor. He tries to talk to her, but she runs away and again warns him to leave. Guts wanders down the corridors of this immaculate mansion looking for the child, but only gets more increasingly aggressive warnings to leave. He then finds a ballroom with a large portrait of a family, a brother, a sister, and their parents. Those kids then appear behind him, and his brand starts to bleed. The boy says Guts destroyed his world, and they run off. This boy is an apostle named Charles, and his gimmick is basically that he has the power to materialize things from his imagination and the subconscious of others. He's been living in a fantasy world of his own making, and Guts came along and ruined it. It's a lot like how the spiritual power in Silent Hill, well, specifically Silent Hill 2, creates monsters from the deep-seated fears and guilt of emotionally broken people. Now we get on to why this concept is so good for an enemy of Guts. Who gets conjured from Guts' mind? The key members of the Band of the Hawk, Judo, Corcus, and Pippin, of course. The worst part of this for Guts is that these doppelgangers represent his greatest fear. The fear that the Hawks were totally cool with being sacrificed by Griffith so that he could gain power. And since Guts is trying to kill Griffith, he's the traitor, and they have no choice but to defend their commander. After a short fight with them, Corcus really strikes a nerve with Guts by saying that he's not even doing this for the Hawks, he's just after Griffith for his own selfish reasons. On some level, Guts fears that this might be true. He keeps telling himself that he's doing this for them, but is that really what they want? He's able to fend them off and leave the mansion, only to see that the perfect building he just left is actually in ruins. It's never stated how Guts destroyed Charles's world, but if I had to guess, Guts showing up and invading the fantasy reminded Charles that the world he was living in was not real. I think Charles convinced himself that his imaginary world that he'd been living in was actually the real world, and Guts entering it broke that illusion for him. Now Charles thinks that if he can kill Guts, things will just go back to the way they were, so he decides to pursue him. The story then follows the manga like normal, but once Guts gets into the Clifod, and he's separated from his friends, the Band of the Hawk shows up once again, this time with another member, Casca. Casca from the part of the story where she was commander of the Band of the Hawk. Judo then confronts him about abandoning them, and that's another thing that's been eating away at Guts ever since he realized what had happened to Griffith and the Hawks. He still blames himself for the whole thing, and he's not entirely wrong, but it was all a part of causality anyway, and there wasn't really anything he could do to stop it. He knows these aren't the real Hawks, but when he sees a lucid Casca walk over to him and embrace him, he can't help but give in to the fantasy for just a moment. You fight them once more, and afterwards, Charles shows up again. Charles decides to tell Guts' backstory. One day, some people he just calls they came into the mansion and burned it down, killing his parents in the process. Only he and his sister Marion survived. He then found a Bahamut in the rubble and used it. He talks about using the Bahamut's power to protect his sister Marion, you know, the only loved one he has left, but the Bahamut requires you to sacrifice the person or people you love the most, so no bonus points if you figure out where this is going. You then fight him, and the fight's extremely annoying because he has an attack that inverts your controls, as well as another one that freezes you in place. It is exactly as fun as it sounds. You beat him, the kid runs away, and Guts pieces together that Charles sacrificed his sister to the God Hand. Why he didn't figure that out immediately is beyond me, but whatever. Charles shows up one final time a little later and taunts Guts about how he has to face his guilt, and then there's a final showdown with the Hawks. This time, the Hawks have counterattack moves that are either taken directly from the manga or are at least very consistent with each warrior's fighting style. Casca's is the move she does in the manga where she uses her sword like a pole vault and jumps over your attack and then slashes you. Judo does the attack where he slides through your legs and stabs you in the stomach, but Pippin and Corcus's aren't as cool. Pippin just kind of blocks your attack and pushes you away, and Corcus avoids your attack by falling over like the big goober that he is. Guts seems to be coming to terms with his guilt as the fight goes on, because when each Hawk is defeated, their true personalities surface, and they offer kind words to Guts before they disappear.
お前はやはり一人戦いの道を行くんだな。
どんな時でも生き抜くために剣を振る。それがお前だったな。
戦の後、お前と交わした酒、うまかった。
Well, except for Corcus. Because on top of being a goober, he's also an asshole.
これからもせいぜい剣一本抱えてのたうち回るがいいぜ。
It's not over yet, though. After the Hawks leave, it flashes back to the eclipse, and the eclipse scene is right up there with the one from the third Golden Age movie, although abridged.
選ばれし者、この時、この地にあるように、大いなる御手により定められし者、
ここに集まったすべての人たちはベヘリットによってあるべき姿を得たのだよ。心の中で唱え、捧げると。
捧げる。
約束の時、来たれり。
There's still one thing from Guts' past that he must face. Griffith himself. The way it's presented is kinda weird, though. It's presented like a memory of the fight between Guts and Griffith when Guts left the Hawks. It even has the same finishing blow at the end, where Guts blows through Griffith's guard and stops short of cleaving through his shoulder. But Guts is in his current armor, Griffith is in full armor, and it takes place on the Hill of Swords. None of those things are consistent with the actual fight. The only thing I can think of is that they were trying to recreate that fight, but couldn't afford to make new character models with the correct clothing and a new area, so they just kinda went with what they had. Though they could have just removed the swords from the Hill of Swords, and it would have looked better because the original fight was in the snow anyway, but it's not a big deal. In the end, the game wanted an excuse to fight Griffith, and I'm cool with it. It's a fun fight, he has tons of counter moves and special attacks that look great, and ends with that cinematic recreation of the duel that I mentioned, and I think it was a nice extra little treat to add to the game. After Griffith's dealt with, the final showdown with Charles happens. He scolds Guts and asks about how he could possibly be so cruel to kill these illusions of his friends like that, and how he could never hurt a loved one. But Guts be like, "Bitch, I know you sacrificed your sister."
自分にとってかけがえのないもの。
嘘だ。そんな。
Charles then freaks out because stealing one concept from Silent Hill 2 isn't good enough. He also forgot that he killed his sister and thought the illusory Marion that he made for himself was the real one. This causes him to transform into his apostle form, which is a giant moth with eyeball wings. It actually looks quite similar to Rosine's final apostle form. The fight happens, and there's not much to speak of other than a pretty sick counter move where he charges you and then you jump on his back and stab him with the Dragon Slayer. This is the end of the game's original content, and I think was a great addition. It's extremely thematically appropriate to have Guts face the guilt he feels over the Band of the Hawk directly like this. The only real complaint I have is that this final showdown happens right before the boss fight with Slan. The cutscene that Slan shows up in literally plays the instant the cutscene where Charles dies ends. It's kinda shitty to have two major boss fights back to back like that. I feel like they should have just had the Hawk/Charles fight earlier in the Clifod instead of right at the end. So, for the Slan fight, she has these bat wings that she summons that stops all attacks from getting through. I ended up breaking through the guard just by shooting her with the cannon, and then triggering rage mode and then mashing the attack button until the first phase ended. I feel like there was supposed to be some sort of trick to get through, but I just kinda brute forced it. She then grabs Guts and inflicts that astral wound on his chest, but then, that boy Ominous Skeleton shows up. Phase 2 is much of the same, but it sucks because they add a bunch of random ogres to the fight. After you beat her, Isidro actually does a cool thing, and even he's in shock that he was able to do something competent. Shirka does all the real work though. just like always. Slan fucks off, Skull Knight uses his new sword to teleport Guts out, and there's this nice scene where Guts thinks about the Hawks one last time, and how he's happy he's found some people he can call comrades again, even though he thought that would never happen. We off to the endgame now. There's a new enemy type in this section, as this is where the War Demons show up, but there aren't any real huge gameplay differences with them. One thing I will say, though, is the scene where Flora's mansion is on fire and she gives her final goodbye to Shirka hits just as hard as it does in the manga. Like I said before, these cutscenes really know how to nail the important parts. Now it's Grunbeld time. This game really goes out with a bang. You fight Grunbeld as Guts in his tired, worn-out state, and because of that, you do no damage until you get the Berserker armor. They actually totally change your moveset for the last 3 fights of the game. They put a lot of effort into something that you only use a few times right at the end. They give you a huge speed boost with the Dragon Slayer, but without the sword losing its weighty feel. They have you fight a bunch of war demons right after you get the armor, and it feels so good. You're just running around, dicing them to pieces, flipping and dipping all over the place. Again, right on the money where it counts. After you get your little test drive with the Berserker armor, the Beast of Darkness shows itself, and as the armor takes on its new wolf form, the roaring howl that Guts makes is so fucking badass, it's downright scary. Now it's Grunbeld Part 2. Powered up with the armor, you can actually do damage now. This fight's super cool. The counter and heat moves are all godlike, and it really does justice to the manga version of the fight. It even has the part where Guts has his cannon arm in opposition to Grunbeld's cannon shield, and you end up destroying his shield just like in the manga. With this part of the fight done, it's time for Dragon Grunbeld. New form means new special attacks, and they're just as badass as the others. There does come a point in the fight where you do no damage again, and I don't know if it's on a timer or if you need to hit him enough, but it eventually gets to the point where Guts loses control and Shirka must bring him back to his senses with her astral body. Again, they do the scene really well.
おい、今手足が争ってんの。
どうすればあなたがやるのです。師匠様、あなたが道を示すのです。力の乱流の中にいる天使殿に。わかりました。やってみます。いけない、流れに委ねては。思い出して、あなたが旅する理由、今戦っている理由を。あなたにはガッツ、楽園の天使ガッツ、楽園の娘キャスカを守るのです。
キャスカ
Makes me want a competently done anime of the entire series. The only thing that kinda sucks is that you can only do damage by doing the same attack to him over and over again. Don't get me wrong, it's a sick attack, but it loses a bit of cool factor and badassery every time you do it. With Grunbeld finally taken down, it's time for the game to come full circle with a final showdown with Zod. This is how you do a final boss. Zod goes absolutely mental, attacking non-stop as that intro track kicks in for extra hype. Your only option for doing damage at this point is to nail these counterattacks, one of which is the one where you cut his arm off and then Zod just immediately reattaches it. With Zod attacking endlessly like that and Guts just getting knocked around but then recovering instantly, it really gives that feel to the fight where Guts is taking tons of damage, but the armor is just making him not even notice it, and it just completely has the same tone as the fight in the manga.
Yoくやりましたね、シール家。お行きなさい。 やだ、私。
あなたには分かっていたはず。その時が来たのです。己の行く道を探しなさい、愛弟子よ。命はその姿を変えるだけ。あなたの夢の中でまた会えるわ。
お師匠様。
あなたの巣立ちに祝福を。
さよなら。さよなら。私の日だまり。
Flora comes back as a fire spirit, and you get that heartbreaking picture of "Goodbye, my sunshine," as Shirka says that line with so much sadness in her voice. And that's the end of the game. This game will absolutely test your patience and make you ask yourself if it's really worth going on. But isn't that just the perfect metaphor for Berserk itself? If you just keep on struggling and pull yourself through, you'll eventually be rewarded in the end. This is the first major video I've made since Miura's passing, but it seems like Berserk will live on, and I'll definitely be there to cover this amazing series as it continues. Thanks so much for sticking it through all the way to the end.